record. So yeah, I will hand over to you, Jane.
Okay, thank you very much. And hello, everybody, and welcome. And I've just realised because I'm doing the slides myself, I don't think I can see the chat box, or if I can, then I'm not clever enough to do it, which is a bit of a shame because I do often ask people to put things in the chat box, but we will see. So it's just called Communicating People with People Living with Dementia. And the communicating bit is interesting, really, because dementia actually robs people of their ability to speak out about things that are happening, about abuse, neglect, and discrimination. And so we have to really think about what it is that we're doing when we're communicating with people living with dementia. And obviously, dementia's I'm not going to talk to you about what dementia is actually, but it is a progressive disease. And so people in the earlier stages of dementia will probably have different communication needs to people who are in the later stages of communication of dementia. And so there's no sort of catch-all as such, but the key thing is that people living with dementia are actually changing the way they communicate. And so what I'm going to do for the first half of this webinar is actually think about what exactly we're communicating and how people are communicating to us. And then in the second half, we'll look a little bit more at different ways of communicating with people who are communicating in different ways or having difficulties in terms of not being able to articulate what's happening to them, whatever that need might be. And throughout the presentation on the slides, you'll see little captions like you have here. It's good to be valued and to be a somebody, not a nobody. A lot of the little things that come up will actually just say something like feelings matter most. Because in the end, what we're going to be talking about when we're talking about communication is how people are feeling, because the feelings are what are going to actually enable us to try and understand what people's needs are. So I hope by the end of this session that you'll get that and understand where I'm coming from when I'm starting off by not actually saying very much about communication at all. So we're going to be, oh, I can't move this on now. Why can't I move it on? Huh. Yes, we're going to be thinking about the effects of dementia on communication, so how it actually impacts on people, and then think about ways of living with people living with dementia. What I want to start off with is just to get you to think about driving along a foggy road or walking along a foggy path. Just think about being in the fog on a foggy day and think about how it feels to you if you're in the fog, whether it's a thick fog where you can see very little, maybe it's not quite so thick and you can see a little bit more. But just think for a moment about what it feels like. And then if I could see this chat box, what I want you to put into it is your feelings. Thank you, Kate. I've just managed to see it, but then it comes in the middle of my screen. It doesn't do me anything at all. So Kate will flag any questions to me, but actually I can, if you just put some ideas in the chat box about how you're feeling in this fog, how you're feeling driving through the fog. Tracy, thank you. Thank you. Uncertain, constricted, frustrated, scared. That's a really good word because I'm going to come back to that. Uncertain, afraid, and anxious. Disorientated, confused, frustrated. So there's a lot of key words there. Blurred, yes, because that's another key word. In fact, they're all key words when we're thinking about communicating with people with dementia, because people who are living with dementia explain it. Many people have written about this and describe it as like being in a fog. So your starting point for communicating with people with dementia is that you're starting off with all this. You're not starting off with somebody who's feeling good. You're starting off in your communication with somebody who's afraid, anxious, uncertain, frustrated, scared, constricted, needing to be a bit more careful because they're unsure. That's a good one, Denise, because if you're thinking about being more careful, then obviously you're going to be wary, disorientated, anxious, afraid. All these things are coming up, anxious. So you're working with people, you're trying to communicate with people who have these feelings, which is why I talk about all the time feelings matter most, because it's just so important to think about what is this person feeling. Wendy Mitchell is a lovely person who did a lot of she wrote a lovely book which is just in the bottom here, Somebody I Used to Know, and I've seen her speak. She sadly passed away recently, but I saw her speak, and she describes a bad day as a fog descending on the brain, and she describes how the world doesn't make much sense, and she just wants to curl up and wait for the fog to lift. And on that, she was talking about her book when I saw her, and she says while it does exercise her brain on good days, it's also exhausting. And so when the brain's exhausted, it shuts down. We all do that, don't we? When you're absolutely knackered and you've had a busy day and you get home and you're just exhausted, you can't do anything else, you shut down, and you might don't completely shut down, but you certainly sit down in a chair, just shut the world out for a minute, and you might even close your eyes to shut down. But for people living with dementia, the brain shuts down so that they absolutely cannot function at all. And another person who's written a lot about dementia says that when that brain, when she gets that brain fog, then she sits and she looks as though she's staring into space, and not able to function. And you may have seen people who have perhaps had a busy day. Somebody living with dementia has had a really busy day, or too much is happening around them, and then they just shut down and they get what it's people have said is like a blank, brainless look. I don't like the word brainless, but it is really trying to say that the brain shut down and so it's not working. And it's important to really remember that if that brain's working, then how can people communicate? So you have to think about what's happened to somebody before you've met with them. Maybe if they've had a really busy day, if they've already seen a physio or a relative or a doctor or somebody who's been asking them a few questions, that will make their brain so exhausted that it shuts down. So you might go and see them and they're not able to communicate. So one of the keys to communicating to start off with is to not just think about, which many people know and think about, well, when's a good time to go and see someone? It's even more nuanced than that. It's not just people are better in the morning or the afternoon, or better before medication or after medication. It's also actually how busy has their brain been before you start to talk to them. So people do say, and several of you came up with that word, that how people feel is scared. So you're talking to scare people. So before you, part of your communication is trying to reassure, or trying to make people feel, love that dog, Hayley, trying to reassure people that actually you're there and you're not scary. Now, just think about it for a moment. In that foggy world, one of the things that makes you scared is not really being able to see properly and work out what's what. Is that tall thing in front of me a tree, a man about to attack me? Well, I think a man because I'm a woman, but somebody about to attack me, a telegraph pole or whatever. You don't quite know what it is until you get a bit nearer. So one of the things about communicating with people is, first of all, working out how foggy is their world that day. Because if you're too far away, then they're not going to want to communicate with you, because they can't actually work out if you're a person or not necessarily. So you have to try and work out and get into that foggy world. They're frightened, they're scared. And so you're coming along, this voice coming out of the fog. So you have to try and work out, you always I mean, this goes through all communication, but particularly with people living dementia, you have to get that eye contact. You have to be on that level, but you have to be within the out of the fog. So you might have to be quite close to them sometimes. You might be able to be further away, just depending on how thick the fog is. And that fog obviously gives you negative feelings, obviously means that people lack self-esteem, they lack confidence. So really thinking about those feelings all the time are really, really important. I do talk really quickly. I apologise, or no apologies really, because I want to get through loads of stuff, and I'm so interested in dementia and helping people communicate with people living with dementia that I just like to pile the information in. So I'm just going to rabbit on, and I know that Kate will highlight any questions as we go. Some of you may know this bookshelf analogy. It's taken from the Alzheimer's Society. And if you do, I don't actually make any apologies, because it's always a good thing to actually remind ourselves of the fact that not only do feelings matter most, actually how we keep good feelings alive and don't actually make people feel even worse than they do already in their scared, frightened world is important. So this, you have to sort of think about a bookshelf. There's two bookshelves really. If I was standing up and talking to you about this in a face-to-face, I would say, imagine that I'm a person living with dementia, and on one side of me I have a bookshelf, which is a really solid bookshelf. You know, doesn't wobble, doesn't move. And each book on that bookshelf represents a memory or a fact. So my top shelf holds very recent books, like what I had for breakfast this morning. My shoulders are maybe books from the 60s. My knees are books maybe from my 20s. And at my feet are books from my childhood. And dementia rocks my bookcase from side to side, and the books start to fall off. And they fall off from the top shelf first. So as the dementia progresses, that top shelf will empty, or the upper shelves, all of them will empty. So what I think of as my most recent memories will come from further down the bookcase, earlier in my life. So I might start thinking that I'm actually in my 20s. You know, I'm not actually anymore a 75-year-old person. I'm in my 20s. And what can happen so far then is that I might think my son might look exactly like my husband. He might be the image of his dad. But because I'm in my 20s, I might keep thinking that my son is actually my husband. Now, while this can be distressing for the son and the husband, actually you have to enter that person's reality. You're not going to put those top shelves, those books, back on the top shelf. So you have to go with it. And there's no point in the son saying, oh, I'm not Dad, I'm James, or whatever it is. Absolutely no point at all, because that would just distress me if I'm the person with dementia. So you have to really think about not what is that person's reality. And often people can tell you. I was talking to somebody the other day whose mother is living with dementia, and she said, oh, she keeps talking about this and that, and I've told her that, you know, that they're not here anymore. She kept talking about her dad, and she said, I keep telling her my dad's not here and my dad's died. And I said, don't do that, because every time she hears that your dad has died, she's going to get upset, because it's the first time she's heard it for her. So she's going to go through that grief every time. I mean, you do hear some funny stories sometimes, and the person who told me this sort of thinks it's funny, and she did say I can share it when I'm doing my teaching and training. And her dad had an affair when he was younger, and his mum knew about the affair, and they've obviously moved on and they've stayed together all their lives. And his daughter knows about the affair, who's my colleague, and but they never, you know, it was in the past. But of course now he's living with dementia, and he's back on that shelf. So bless him, he calls his wife by the name of the person he had the affair with, which my friend finds really, really funny. But obviously it's a bit very distressing for a mom. And so my friend actually finds it's harder work being with her mum sometimes than it is being with her dad, because she can cope with the dementia and her dad, and be in his reality and so on. But her mum still hasn't quite got to that point yet, which you can get, really, can't you? So that's the factual side of my factual bookcase. But there's another bookcase, which is an emotional bookcase. So our feelings and our emotions are managed separately. And if you know anything about brains, then the factual bookcase is in a part of the brain called the hippocampus, and the emotional bookcase is in a part of the brain called the amygdala. And I don't actually expect you to remember either of those names. I just love them. I love the word hippocampus and amygdala, so I have to say them. But the amygdala, the emotional bookcase, is where your feelings and emotions are managed. So you picture a bookcase there, and I told you the wrong thing before, because the factual bookcase is the wobbly bookcase. The emotional bookcase is solid. So for every book on our factual bookcase, we have a corresponding book on our emotional bookcase on the other side. So in the factual bookcase, you might have a memory of a teacher you had at school, and you won't remember his name or anything like that, but you'll remember the emotions that that person, perhaps the feelings of inspiration when he taught you. So that emotional bookcase never goes. So if you go back to thinking about the example I gave of somebody's son, who the person with dementia thinks is her husband. So if he keeps trying to say, well, oh, mum, I'm who I am, this is my name. That, because she doesn't understand that, because she's not, as far as she's concerned, this is her husband. The more you say you've got it wrong, the more upset she's going to be. So and she might even have, you might even finish having an argument with her. And so that person will finish up feeling quite sad and upset and angry, which are all emotions and feelings that add to those foggy ones, the scared, the frustrated, etc. ones. And the son might going away thinking, oh, well, it doesn't really matter because she'll forget all about it. But actually, she won't, because those feelings of sadness and upset and anger will go. So she might well forget she's had the visit. What she won't forget is the feelings. So that's why we say to people, don't try and correct them, try and make them feel good. Try and just have a conversation so that when you leave, she thinks to herself, oh, that was so lovely, and I feel so relaxed and happy because I've had such a good time with whoever it is, and rather than her feeling sad and unhappy and upset. What we're trying to do is to support people to feel loved and feel happy and feel content. The same thing goes for going out on outings sometimes. So if somebody, for example, in a care home has gone out for the day and they've had an amazing time, fantastic time, gone to the seaside, had ice cream or whatever, and then they come back and they've forgotten about the whole day out, but they're feeling great. They've had an amazing day. And the books come off their factual the book has come off their factual bookcase. They've forgotten the visit, where they've been, the trip out. But what stays with them are those feelings of happiness and comfort and feeling safe. And feeling safe is another key word, and it's one that I often use when I'm communicating with people living with dementia, because they're scared, aren't they? I've said to you, people are constantly scared in that foggy world. You've identified that people are constantly scared in that foggy world. So that being the case, what part of our communication with them to start with in terms of reassurance is to help somebody feel safe, because feeling safe is the most important thing. And if you feel safe, then you feel contented, you feel happy, and you're more likely to be able to then respond. So summarize that up very quickly. The person's reality will be just as real to them as our reality is to us. So we respond to their feelings, and by responding to their feelings, we might then be able to try and address what their needs are. Okay, so just moving on from that a little bit, I just want you to think about a few things that can happen that will also have an impact on communication before I talk about some different ways of communicating. So we all have our own unique personal history, our own life experiences, and the environment will also have an impact on us. Whatever environment we're in has an impact on us, and the environment will include us as advocates when we're working with somebody with living with dementia. So we want we want people to feel good about us. And sometimes that's something as little as just smelling nice or wearing something that looks nice. And red is often a very good colour for people living with dementia because they can see it. So lots of things go as the brain starts to shut down. And the colour red, apparently, I'm not an expert on that side of it, but the colour red is one of the last to go. And I do know I work with people in dementia on Mondays in particular with a group of people. And I do know when they comment on what I'm wearing, it is often something that's bright red or orange that they'll say, oh, that, or a scarf. It can be a scarf or whatever it might be. I did know an advocate once who changed the colour of her hair all the time, and she always had bright purple, bright red hair. And I often wished I had the bravery to do that, but I never did. I could do nail varnish, but not hair. So personality is another thing that obviously will have an impact, and it's quite important really to just think about that for a minute as well, because you will all know that personality can cause behaviors that we might find challenging, and indeed we might also know of our own behaviors that could become challenging in the future. And so this is just an example here. If somebody is independent and rude to people, is it because in the past they have been used to managing a big company? And actually, when somebody tells them what to do, it doesn't fit with who they think they are, particularly if they're on that bookcase, part of their bookcase where they are still in work. So thinking about people's backgrounds, people's lives, knowing about their lives is really important. Sadly, because I do work with people living with dementia and it is a progressive illness, I do go to quite a few funerals, and I'm often upset by what I didn't know about them when they have a eulogy and they tell us about people's past, and I leave thinking, if only I'd known that. And I do really, really work hard to try and find out as much as I can about people's past. And I really recommend that you do it or you work with others to do it, because it's so useful. And equally, knowing about people's life histories, we all have difficult times in our lives. We all have amazing times in our lives, and they all leave their mark. There are traumas. And a bit like this personal example I gave you before of somebody who had an affair and he's gone back to that. So other traumas will return to people when they're on that shelf in their dementia journey. And they might not be able to explain how they're feeling, but they might be fearfully upset because of particular things that are happening that are taking them back to, in a situation of domestic violence or whatever it might be. So thinking about their past is really, really key in many ways. Not always easy. So I'm not for 1 minute saying it's easy, but it is key. Physical health is also important. And I do say to people at the bottom here, it says, think, what are you like when you're in pain? And if you put that into the chat box now, I just know that there's very few people who will say, I'm the most lovely person to be around. You might, and if you do, then well done you. But quite a few of us are not such nice people when we're in pain. If you're living with dementia, you might also not actually know what to do if you're in pain. You don't remember what a pain relief is. And indeed, you may have in the past never liked taking tablets. You might not like taking tablets now. And I had to fight once for somebody to have a pain patch because she had been very she'd been really into alternative medicine and absolutely hated taking any type of tablet, not only because of her sort of values and beliefs, but also because she just found them so hard to swallow, hated it. So she would just spit them up or chuck them across the room or whatever it might be. And so, and the doctor, who I had a particular argument with, said that, more or less implied, he didn't say it to be fair to him, but he did imply that because of her advancing years, she was 88 at the time, and because of the fact that pain patches or even the stuff that tastes nice, the paracetamol that tastes nice because it's in liquid form, more expensive, and basically was implying it too expensive for somebody that old. And so it was a battle. But didn't it change her life when she had that pain patch, because she had stuff wrong with her spine, which was really, really painful. And when it was painful, she would walk very, very quickly up and down the corridor, and people would say she was aggressive. I would say she hit out at anybody that tried to stop her walking up and down, because A, she was in her scared, frightened world, and B, she didn't know what to do to stop the pain. And so she walked, which sometimes worked, to be fair. But what she was telling people was that it was very, very painful that particular day. And then another one that's, before we focus on communication, is a little bit more, is thing about people wandering. So people can walk around for very many reasons, and I've just told you about somebody who walked around because she was in pain. People might, I knew another lovely man who whose wife had died, and basically he was walking around all the time looking for her. He was very confused in his frightened, scary world. He'd moved very rapidly from living in his own home where he'd lived all his married life to moving into this very strange care home not that long after she had passed away. And he got depressed. He didn't understand what was going on, really, really upset, and trying to work out what his feelings were rather than just trying to tell him to sit down all the time, was really not the right way to do it. Some people would walk with him, and that was so much better. It's so helpful if people walked with him and talked about his wife. And there's two things there, isn't there? One is actually people are taking notice of him instead of just ignoring him wandering around. And the other thing was actually they were prepared to talk about his wife, and that made him happy. He loved talking about her, what they'd done, going dancing and all that kind of stuff. The word wonder is one that some people don't like. Sometimes people say it's better to say they're walking with purpose. I actually don't mind the word wander, because I have been known to wander around shops, not quite sure what I'm doing and what I want. And I think we all will just wander sometimes. It's maybe wandering aimlessly, maybe wandering just because we need to clear our heads. So I think wandering is fine as long as it's used in a positive way and an understanding way, rather than a label. He's a wanderer. Lovely song though it is. So there's some of the things to take into account when we're thinking about communication, taking into account, as I say, personality, life history, physical health, mental health. And then we can focus on communication and think about how can we unlock those memories? How can we improve the lives of people? How can we improve their care? How can we find out what all we can about that individual and their feelings? Always remembering that we've got to go into their world. We can't get them to come into ours. So we have to go into their world. We have to work out where they are and what they're thinking, and make them feel good about the world that they're in. Okay, I'm going to take a breath, a drink, and then carry on. So, making sense with people living with communication. So, people who living with dementia, people you're communicating with who are living with dementia, are often come out with things that people find a little bit difficult. And again, I have spoken to so many people saying, oh, well, she keeps saying she wants to pick up the kids from school, or she keeps saying she needs to get to work. And we have to think about what that's about, and think about what are people trying to communicate to us when they're saying they want to go to work, or they need to pick up their children from school. And if you think about the psychological needs that we all have a need to feel, to have an identity, to feel included, to be occupied, to have something to do. And, so if somebody is saying that they need to pick children up from school, then they're on that shelf, that part of the bookshelf they're on, their identity might well be as a responsible mother, and we need to respect that identity. We need to think, but as humans, our identity is important. We want to be individual, we want to be special, we want to have our own identity, we want our individuality to be recognized. Not only in this instance, perhaps as the example is in terms of the picking children up from school, but in all ways, in our food preferences, in our clothing, in our activities. Our identity is key. And so again, that's another reason why it's important to know the life history of somebody we're working with, as well as what shelf they're on. Because if they are sort of thinking about going to pick somebody up from school, then you kind of know where they're at on that factual shelf that they're on. And occupation, again, is often used in relation to paid employment, but it is about people being involved in a significant way in the process of life, using what abilities they have. And if people are deprived of meaningful, what you might call rewarding work, then not only does their self-esteem become more damaged, remembering it's damaged already in their scared, foggy world, but we all want to be occupied. We all need to have something to do to help others. And that work needs to have meaning and purpose. So to go and pick up the children from school, or to go to work, is giving you meaning and purpose. And recognizing, that you are a person, seeing the person first and not seeing the dementia first, which was on one of my little captions a little bit earlier on. So thinking about where people are at, what they're doing, and trying to thinking to yourself, so what meaningful activities do they have during the day? How many children did they have? What work did they do? Can we help them, to sort of feel like they're at work? So does somebody needs a bit of money in their pocket so they can go shop? They feel like they can go shopping. All these things really, really important in terms of thinking just tiny little ways. Now, if somebody says, "Where's my mum? I want my mum," this is actually another way of people trying to say that there's a need there. And the need, so one of the things about dementia is an illness, it's a progressive illness. And what do we like when we're not well? What do we want when we're not well? We want comfort. We want to feel loved and cherished. So the person who, in many people's lives, and I'm not saying everybody's had the most amazing mother, but many, many people, the first thing, and many children when they fall over and hurt themselves, wherever they are, they cry for their mum. When people are all kinds of situations where when you're feeling sad, unhappy, unsure, worried, scared, frightened, you want your mum. And if you're on that shelf where you think your mum's still alive, even so, then you're going to ask, where's my mum? I want my mum. And I can remember a woman who screamed for her mum every time she was in the care home with her husband. And when he didn't have dementia, but she did. And he had a mobile scooter thing. And it was a very modern home with wide corridors. And I swear to you, I think thought he was on a racing track, because he would bomb down these corridors when he needed a bit of a break from his lovely wife. And as soon as he was out of sight, as soon as he turned into the sort of sitting area, and then he could shoot through there into the conservatory where he could hide. As soon as he was out of sight, she would scream for her mother, because she was immediately scared and frightened, because she didn't have that constant there who she felt safe with. And she didn't feel safe. And you could literally link arms with her and say, "Come on, I'll look after you. I'm here now to look after you. I'll keep you safe." And she would be fine. And you could chat away and she'd completely be fine. So it's thinking about ways of making people feel safe. You are desperate. You are desperately unhappy if you're calling for your mum. You really are. And that reassurance is so important. So you really have to sort of think about, how are you going to focus on those statements? No point in saying, "Oh, you don't go to work anymore, you're in a care home, or your mum's died." We've got to respond to those statements in a way that recognizes where they are and how they're feeling. That feelings matter most, so important. So I've got 3 strategies here in terms of thinking about, what are people trying to say, or how are we going to speak to them in terms of dementia language. And there's lots and lots of things you can do here, and I'm just going to do these 3. And the first one is about stating ideas in positive rather than negative terms. And these are all really simple ideas. There's nothing difficult about them, really. You just have to think it through. So you're trying to give, I've just talked about meaningful occupations. So you quite rightly think to yourself, "Oh, well, a really good idea would be to get them to help in the kitchen, because they used to work in the school kitchens when they were younger. So if she goes and helps in the kitchen, then that would be great." So she picks up the ice cream and puts it in the oven. And the first thing you might think is, "Oh, no, it's the wrong place. Oh, no, to put the ice cream in the oven. It needs to go in the fridge." Actually, that's very negative, obviously. So there's lots of things you could do. Lots of people, when I do this in face-to-face and do it as an exercise, will say to me, "Well, you could say, 'Here you are, shall I help you put it in the fridge?'" But that's actually still negative, because you're still saying that what they've done is wrong. So all you really need to say is, "Oh, thank you for putting the ice cream away for me," because it's not going to take that long before you can whip it out. If it's a hot oven, then you might have a problem with everything melting. If it's a cold oven, it really won't matter for a few minutes. Other things are the same. So there's quite often people have difficulty in terms of getting dressed. And there's lots of ways of supporting you to help people to get dressed in a way that they feel okay. And again, this is always a tricky one, because I've talked to many relatives over the years, and indeed my own mum lived with dementia, and they say, "Oh, my mum always liked to look smart, and now, she just looks a bit scruffy, or she gets things wrong." And I know she'd be upset if she knew what she looked like. And so we kind of have this little sort of ethical dilemma here then, about sort of supporting people and respecting people's wish, desire, and needs to dress themselves, but also respecting the person who is there, who would always like to have looked smart. And so you have to think about this and think about how to work it so that the person is respected and their identity is respected as much as possible. And sometimes you do have to let it go, but not always. I think there's lots and lots of ways of supporting and helping people to get dressed in an easy way, and helping people to take things off as well. "Oh, isn't it a bit warm here? Why don't you take your shirt off?" Something along those lines. So lots of things that you have to think about so that you say things in a positive rather than a negative way. The second thing is avoiding questions. And I always get challenged on this because so many people say to me when I'm doing this, talking about communication and dementia, will say to me, but that's what I have to do. I have to ask questions. I've got to do an assessment. I've got to decide, I've got to get their wishes and feelings. I need to ask the questions. And I would say to you, it's hard. I'm not saying it's easy. And I'm giving you the easiest examples here in the world because it's very easy to turn those questions into positive statements. It's much more difficult sometimes to make positive statements out of some questions that you've got in your head or on your assessment that you need to get answered. But it's really important. If I ask you all a question now, a very simple question, you wouldn't immediately go, oh, right, yes, okay, this is the answer. For a minute, you'd sort of think, oh, I wonder what Jane wants to know here. I wonder what she's getting at. I wonder what the right answer to this question is. And and you might put something in the chat box, you might not. You might think, oh, well, I'll wait to see what everybody else says first. If you're living with dementia and you're already scared and frightened and don't feel very safe, chances of you answering a question are pretty slim. It's much better just to sit and look and think, oh. And if somebody asks you more than one question, that's even worse. And I see this happen so much. I did some role play with some students the other day, and the number of times when we were doing the feedback session, people said, I found myself asking more than one question because they were trying to frame it. And then when they didn't get a response, they try to frame the same question in a different way. But actually, that's experienced as two questions. So let's is often a good word. In these examples, let's go for a walk. And somebody will then be able to say, might be able to respond that they either do want to go for a walk or they don't. Fairly easy, not always, but it's thinking about ways of getting the information you need by making statements, by saying things in a very positive way, and trying to get somebody to communicate back to you. And again, of course, it depends on people's level of where they are in terms of the dementia, how far the illness has progressed. But it makes a huge difference. You're more likely to get a response to a conversational statement than you ever will to a question. And again, if you ask too many questions in a short-ish space of time, then that will even make the fog thicker. And then people are even less likely to respond and even more likely to get a blank, brainless look, which doesn't mean to say that they don't know the answer to that question, but just means their brain's shutting down because they've had too much. So important to really think about not only not asking questions, but not saying too many things at once, like I am now. Okay, and the third one I'm going to talk about is reason and logic. Oh, why won't this go? Hold on, trying to go on to the next one. Something's happened here. Strategy 3, reason and logic. So this statement is reason and logic. You know, toothpaste goes on your teeth and not in your hair. The person that you're talking to obviously doesn't know that because that's why the toothpaste is in their hair. So at that particular point in time, they think that that's what they should be doing. They can't coordinate. It's really hard. The brain has to do so many things all the time. So in order to brush your teeth, you've got to be able to get the toothpaste on your toothbrush, and somebody might have done that for you, but you've still got the brain has got to tell your hand to lift the toothbrush to your mouth, open your mouth, put the toothbrush backwards and forwards, have a spit, do whatever it is, and so on. All those things are different messages from the brain to brush your teeth. And this happens with everything. It's like with walking. Sometimes you see people shuffling along rather than walking because the brain just can't manage to work out how to walk. And also in that scared, foggy world, if you're walking for a short amount of time, you have one foot off the ground because you lift a foot off to put one in front of the other. So if you a bit scared and frightened, then it's easier to shuffle because you're more solid on the ground. That's a slight diversion from using reason and logic, but it's all about the brain overworking, shutting down, and then people not being able to communicate. So offer an alternative response, and there's lots of alternative responses, I'm sure, that you could think of that wouldn't confront somebody, you know, which can be everything from, would you like me to brush your hair for you? To because you want to get the toothpaste out, or doesn't seem to be much toothpaste on your brush on your toothbrush now. Should we put some more on? And then you can run a tap. You can sort of support people and prompt people to do it right. But actually responding to the moment when the toothpaste is in the hair in a confrontational way just makes people feel bad. So just sum up a little bit before I go on to the last part. I always talk about the 3 S's: short, simple, and slow. And I know I've not done slow today. But one of the ways of trying to talk more quickly, which I have learnt because I do talk quickly especially when I'm trying to give lots of information, is to say the ends of your words. And if you say the ends of your words, it immediately slows you down. And it also helps the person who is listening to actually get the whole word. So short, simple sentences. No, and that means not 2 questions, not asking the same things in different ways, just thinking short and simple. Often, if you know that you want some particular information, you have to really prepare and think about what information you want and how you might get that information. Language and phrases that are familiar to the individual. Again, sometimes this means finding out, but there are so many local dialects, local words that people use. So I don't know, if you were taking your lunch to work, you might call it a pack up if you come from one area. You might call it carry out if you come from another area, and so on. Different ways of talking about taking some sandwiches to work for your lunch. So it's the same sort of thing. What are the language and phrases that are familiar to the individual that you're working with? And be prepared to wait so that people can process it. I think that's probably fairly straightforward and you would understand that. So I want to finish up in the last 5 minutes or so talking about something called sundowning. And I spoke to somebody the other day and she goes, oh, I know all about sundowning. Said it happens at in the afternoon when the sun goes down. So I thought to myself, right, okay, so what exactly do they know about sundown? Is that it? So what can happen so often is that somebody will become quite confused and restless and agitated in the late afternoon or evening, quite possibly because their brain's tired apart from anything else. But the exact causes of sundowning are not known, but it does seem to occur, especially, for example, if somebody's been in the same area for a long period of time. So if it's quite natural for anyone to want to move on from where they spent a long period of time, even with a healthy brain. But that desire to relocate can be quite difficult when dementia is involved, quite tricky. and especially if leaving is not actually an option. And I suppose sundowning can present a wide range of symptoms, and it does depend on the type of dementia you're dealing with. And I haven't talked about the different types of dementia, but and if you don't know about them, I think I've put some slides on the end here. But if you don't know about them, the Alzheimer's site is really good, and it's useful to know. So there are different dementias, Alzheimer's being one of them, Lewy body dementia being another, frontotemporal dementia being another, and vascular dementia being another. So person with Alzheimer's, for example, might begin to struggle with keeping up with where they are in life, who the people are around them, might not understand their sort of general situation in the late afternoon. Whereas somebody with Lewy body dementia might get more active hallucinations, more delusional thinking during sundowning. People with vascular dementia can become more unpredictable, and people with frontotemporal dementia might experience more language and word finding issues as part of this sundowning. But the key thing is that during this situation of what we call sundowning is that somebody's trying to express something. But also remember that sundowning isn't just a problem for people who are living with dementia. It's a common phenomenon for all of us. And so while you might need to put on your detective hat to discover someone's unmet needs in terms of this, just remember these familiar taglines. So they're all from songs, aren't they? You're not you when you're hungry, eat a Snickers. It's like these things that kind of just going to make us feel a bit better. And quite often it's not just unique to dementia sundowning as such, although it is something that we all know is important to understand in terms of the people that we're working with. We have to be detectives in all the communication we do. We have to try and be curious. We have to try and decide how to detect the triggers, what people's needs are. And what sundowning really means is that as such, it isn't just about people becoming more difficult and getting another label. It means that one of the 5 basic needs are not being met, and that means that people will communicate in different ways. It's a form of communication, and I'm not going to have time to go down through all these needs, but the five needs are important to always explore, and thinking about if people tell you or you see a shift for somebody when the sun goes down, then check those needs to see what might be happening. Explore them, be that detective. Whether it might need a change in the environment, changing of activity. Sometimes I don't know if there's been trauma in a certain location, finding ways to change the environment so it's not an automatic trigger, especially at that time of the day, can help. Obviously, a snack or a drink that means that somebody's got something to focus on. Having a walk, changing, perhaps somebody else being with somebody for a while can help as well. It's sometimes it's everyone challenge near the end of the day, and so when dementia is involved, the solution may be more difficult to figure out. It's less likely to be able to be managed. It's less likely for you to be able to work out what to do when that happens. But it's really, really important to do it. I'm just whipping through these now because I'm determined not to go over time like I have done sometimes in the past. And I did want to finish up reading you a poem to summarize what I've been talking about in terms of communication. You can read a lot more about sundowning and understanding it, but it is about just offering people choices, just thinking about what's happening, helping people to feel they're not alone, helping to them to be less anxious, and be curious. Think about what's happening to people. Christine Bryden is somebody else who's written a lot about living with dementia, and I've just highlighted those words, new pearls, because I think sometimes, and I work with carers of people living with dementia, and trying to help them to say you've not lost somebody. A lot of people write about having lost somebody, and I completely understand that. But it's actually thinking about what is that person's life like. How can we help their lives to be as good as they can be? Have I got time, do you think, Kate, just to read my poem? I make it 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Go for it.
Thank
Yeah.
you. This poem is called When I Wander, and you'll recognize the things I've been talking about. When I wander, don't tell me to come and sit down. Wander with me. It may be because I'm hungry, thirsty, need the toilet, or maybe I just need to stretch my legs. When I call for my mother, even though I'm 90, don't tell me she's died. Reassure me, cuddle me, ask me about her. It may be that I'm looking for the security that my mother once gave me. When I shout out, please don't ask me to be quiet or walk by. I am trying to tell you something, but I have difficulty in telling you what. Be patient. Try to find out. I may be in pain. When I become agitated or appear angry, please don't reach for the drugs first. I'm trying to tell you something. It may be too hot, too bright, too noisy. Or maybe it's because I miss my loved ones. Try to find out first. When I don't eat my dinner or drink my tea, it's maybe because I've forgotten how to. Show me what to do. Remind me. It may be that I just need to hold my knife and fork. I may know what to do then. When I push you away while you're trying to help me get washed or dressed, maybe it's because I have forgotten what you have said. Keep telling me what you are doing over and over and over. Maybe others will think you're the one that needs the help. With all my thoughts and maybes, perhaps it will be you who reaches my thoughts, understands my fears, and will make me feel safe. Maybe it will be you who I need to thank if I only knew how. And that's just on 1 o'clock. So thank you all for listening. And I will apologise once more for talking so quickly, but I do hope it's been helpful.
Thanks, Jane. Awesome as always. I will pause the recording now and open up for any questions.